Lisa and Eric's marriage looked perfect until the night he secretly watched her with his best friend, uncovering a betrayal so dark it turned deadly. Mark and Julia seemed like the kind of couple people envied. They had a lovely two-story house in a quiet cul-de-sac, a garden Julia loved to keep neat, and a dog that greeted Mark at the door every evening. Neighbors saw them as happy, stable, and ordinary, but behind closed doors, something had begun to shift in ways that Mark couldn't fully explain. He had always been the kind of man who worked hard, sometimes too hard, managing long shifts at the construction site, often coming home late and exhausted. Julia had been supportive, at least in the beginning, when she'd prepare dinner and listen to his stories about work. But lately her attention had drifted somewhere else. The warmth that used to fill their home began to cool slowly, like a candle burning down to its final flicker. It started subtly. Julia's tone changed. She no longer looked up from her phone when Mark spoke to her. The texts came more frequently, and she laughed at her screen in a way that Mark hadn't heard in months. When he asked who she was texting, she brushed him off, saying it was just clients from the gym. Her answers were short, casual, practiced. Mark tried to believe her because trust was something he had always held sacred. But a quiet unease started to eat at him. It grew in his stomach every time her phone buzzed late at night, or when she said she needed to work late with a client who apparently had flexible hours. Mark wasn't a jealous man by nature. He'd always considered himself grounded and patient, the kind of husband who gave space rather than suspicion. But when he began noticing little inconsistencies, like perfume he didn't recognize or a new set of lingerie tags in the trash, it became impossible to ignore the whispering doubts. He told himself not to overthink it, that it was probably nothing. Yet, every small clue formed part of a bigger picture that he couldn't unsee. One Saturday morning, Julia mentioned she had to visit a new client who preferred home sessions. She left early, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit the idea of personal training, a tight dress, makeup done a little too carefully, and that same perfume again. Mark watched her drive away, his chest tightening. Something inside him told him this wasn't about work anymore. The thought made him restless. He cleaned the kitchen just to distract himself, but even the simple clinking of dishes irritated him. By afternoon, he couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his car keys and decided to follow her. He told himself it was only to ease his mind. He trailed her from a distance, careful not to be seen. She drove across town, passing the gym entirely, which confirmed his worst fear. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as her car turned into the parking lot of a modest hotel. He parked farther away and watched her wait in her car. Moments later, another vehicle pulled up beside hers. A man stepped out, a tall, confident-looking man dressed casually, but with the kind of ease that came from familiarity. Julia got out immediately, smiled, and walked straight into his arms. They held each other for longer than two people working out should. Mark's heart dropped. The sound of blood rushing in his ears drowned out everything else. He wanted to look away, but his eyes refused to move. The way she leaned into the man, the way her face lit up, it wasn't something forced, it was real. That realization hit him harder than anything he had ever experienced. His world, everything he believed about his marriage, cracked in an instant. He stayed in his car, frozen, as the couple entered the hotel together. The clock ticked for nearly an hour before they finally came out again, laughing, relaxed, unaware that the man who had shared Julia's life for years had just watched her betray him completely. Mark's entire body trembled. He didn't know if it was anger, grief, or disbelief. The only thing he knew for sure was that something inside him had shifted, something deep and irreversible. That night, Julia came home as if nothing had happened. She hummed while washing dishes, told him she was tired, and went to bed early. Mark stood in the hallway, staring at her closed door, his thoughts tangled. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but his voice stayed trapped in his chest. He couldn't bring himself to confront her, not yet. He needed proof, undeniable evidence, because deep down he still wanted to believe he was wrong. Sleep didn't come that night. Mark lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and determination building inside him. He thought about all the sacrifices he had made to keep their life comfortable, the long hours, the postponed vacations, the little surprises he used to bring her that now sat ignored in drawers. How could she throw it all away so easily? How could someone who once promised forever hide something so cruel? In the darkness, a plan began to form in his mind. It wasn't clear yet, just a flicker of something that gave him the sense of control he'd been missing. He decided that if Julia was lying to him, he would uncover everything. He wanted to see the truth with his own eyes, no matter how painful it might be. The next morning, he went about his day as usual. He made breakfast, kissed her on the forehead before work, and smiled as if nothing was wrong. Inside, however, he was hollow. Every glance she gave him felt like a lie. Every word, every gesture seemed rehearsed. He studied her face, searching for a hint of guilt, but she looked calm, even happy. That, more than anything, terrified him. That evening, while Julia showered, Mark took her phone and installed a small monitoring app he had read about online. He knew it was wrong, but at that point, morality meant nothing compared to the need for truth. Later that week, he also bought a few discreet security cameras. Claiming they were for home safety, he placed them in corners she'd never noticed behind picture frames. In the living room vent, and one small device cleverly hidden on the bookshelf facing their bedroom door. When everything was set, Mark finally felt a strange sense of peace. He convinced himself that soon, one way or another, he would know the full story. He didn't sleep that night either, but this time he wasn't restless. He was waiting. Days passed without incident. Julia went to work, returned late, and went about her routines. Mark began to wonder if he had imagined everything, if maybe he was losing his mind to suspicion. But one evening, as he checked the footage on his laptop, his pulse quickened. Julia was home in the middle of the day, something she rarely did. She looked nervous, pacing by the window. Moments later, she glanced toward the door, straightened her hair, and smiled. Then, someone knocked. Mark's heart sank when he saw a familiar silver SUV pulling into the driveway. The same man from the hotel stepped inside their house. Julia greeted him with the same warmth he had once thought was meant only for him. The camera captured everything, every small gesture, every look that confirmed what Mark had feared all along. He sat there staring at the screen, his jaw clenched, his chest tightening until it hurt to breathe. He had found his proof, but instead of closure, all it brought him was rage. The kind that burns quietly at first, then spreads like fire through every thought, every heartbeat. That night, as Julia slept peacefully beside him, Mark lay awake, his eyes wide open. He had seen the truth with his own eyes, and it was far worse than he ever imagined. The woman he loved had betrayed him in their own home, and now the walls that once sheltered love echoed only with the silent weight of deceit. And somewhere in the dark, Mark made a promise to himself. If she could lie so easily, so completely, then he would no longer play the fool. He would stop being the man who didn't see. He would become the man who watched everything. Mark woke up the next morning with a strange calmness, a kind of numbness that scared him more than anger ever could. The night before, he had seen the proof he'd been searching for. Julia had brought the man into their house, their shared space, the same place where they had built years of memories. Every moment from the footage replayed in his mind like a cruel film he couldn't stop. He didn't know which part hurt more, the betrayal itself, or the fact that she had done it so fearlessly, without guilt, as if their marriage meant nothing anymore. He went through his morning routine automatically. Coffee, shower, tie, keys. His movements were mechanical, almost rehearsed, as though his body was operating separately from his mind. Julia greeted him in the kitchen with a smile, pretending everything was normal. She asked him about work, laughed at something meaningless, and placed a slice of toast on his plate. Mark nodded quietly, his eyes fixed on her, trying to see traces of shame. There were none. Her calmness was unbearable. It was as if she was living in an entirely different world where nothing was wrong. When she left for work, he sat alone at the table, staring at the untouched breakfast. The clock ticked loudly, its steady rhythm echoing in the silence of the room. The world outside carried on, birds chirped, cars passed, but for Mark, time had stopped. He opened his laptop and played the footage again. He couldn't help it. His hands trembled as the image appeared. Julia laughing, touching, whispering, completely lost in her moment with that man. His stomach turned. The betrayal felt heavier with every second he watched. As the days passed, Mark began monitoring everything. The cameras became his obsession. He checked them before leaving for work, during his lunch breaks, and as soon as he returned home. It became a twisted routine. Each time Julia said she was meeting a client, he would check if she really was. At first, she seemed cautious, but within a week, she grew bold again. The man started visiting more often, sometimes even when Mark was supposed to be at work. The sight made him sick, yet he couldn't stop watching. It was like staring into an open wound, painful, but impossible to look away. Mark started keeping records. He documented every date, every time the man appeared, every piece of evidence that proved what Julia was doing. He told himself he needed it for when the time came to confront her, but deep down he wasn't sure confrontation was what he wanted anymore. What he wanted was control? Something had been stolen from him, his dignity, his trust, and he couldn't rest until he took something back. One afternoon, he left work earlier than usual. He parked his truck 2 houses down and waited. Julia's car was already in the driveway. 10 minutes later, the same silver SUV pulled up. The man got out, carrying a gym bag. Mark felt a surge of cold fury run through him. He could see their silhouettes through the curtain, 2 figures moving close together, too close. He took out his phone and opened the hidden camera feed, watching from inside his car. There it was again, the scene he had already seen too many times. Julia leading the man into the living room, pulling the curtains shut, moving in ways that shattered what was left of Mark's composure. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his pulse thundering in his ears. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to storm in, to scream, to break everything, but a strange paralysis held him in place. He could only watch. The video continued to play, and the minutes dragged on like hours. When the man finally left, Julia didn't seem remorseful. She walked around the house casually, humming a tune as if nothing had happened. That was the moment Mark realized something had changed inside him forever. The quiet man he had always been was gone. What replaced him was something darker, colder, and patient. That night, Julia came to bed late. Mark pretended to be asleep, though every part of him was wide awake. He listened to her breathing beside him, slow and peaceful, and wondered how she could rest so easily while destroying everything they had built. He stared at the ceiling until sunrise, his mind filled with questions he would never ask her. Over the next few days, Mark began learning more about the man. Through the license plate, he discovered his name was Eric. He was married too, with 2 children and a steady job. That discovery made the betrayal even more disgusting. Julia wasn't just cheating on Mark. She was part of another man's secret life. The realization fueled his rage, but also sparked something else, a sense of purpose. He began following Eric when he could, memorizing his routines, watching him from afar. He knew where Eric worked, where he lived, and even which coffee shop he stopped at each morning. Mark kept everything hidden from Julia. He smiled when she smiled, acted normal, and kept his tone even. But inside, he was no longer the man she thought she knew. He was a hunter waiting for the right moment to strike. He started saving the recordings on an external drive, labeling each file by date and time. Every night he reviewed them carefully, memorizing every detail. He noticed how comfortable Eric looked in his house, how Julia seemed to forget all sense of fear. The way she moved, the way she laughed, it was like she belonged to someone else entirely. His life outside of home began to fall apart. He stopped focusing at work. His coworkers noticed the change. He barely ate, barely slept. His face looked drawn, his eyes dull from exhaustion. He began living in a state of quiet madness, fueled by the constant replay of betrayal. One evening, Julia told him she would be meeting a new client after work. Her tone was casual, but her eyes gave her away. Mark nodded, pretending to believe her. When she left, he waited exactly 20 minutes before following her. He kept his headlights off as he trailed her car through the back roads. She didn't drive to the gym. Instead, she went to a small rental house near the edge of town. Eric's SUV was already parked there. Mark parked a few houses away and watched the lights inside flicker on. He sat there for nearly 2 hours, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his fingers went numb. His mind was spinning with thoughts he couldn't control, flashes of rage, humiliation, and sorrow, all colliding into something dangerous. He imagined what it would feel like to confront them right there, to make them see what they had done to him. But he stayed still. When Julia finally left the house, her expression was calm, even happy. Mark followed her home again, his mind silent but his chest heavy with hatred. That drive home felt endless. He no longer saw the familiar streets. Everything blurred into a haze of red tail lights and dark thoughts. That night, while Julia showered, Mark stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale. He barely recognized himself. He wasn't sure when he had changed, but he knew there was no turning back now. Something inside him had snapped the part of him that forgave, the part that reasoned. He realized he wasn't just collecting proof anymore. He was preparing himself for something else. As he lay in bed that night beside the woman he once loved, Mark's mind was quiet, eerily calm. He knew now that watching wasn't enough. The cameras had shown him everything he needed to see. The next time it happened, he wouldn't be sitting in his car. He would be there, standing where she could see him, where she would finally understand what she had done. Mark closed his eyes, pretending to sleep, while Julia's steady breathing filled the silence. Somewhere in that silence, a decision was made, one that would end everything they had ever known. Mark no longer felt fear or confusion. The uncertainty that had once consumed him was gone. What replaced it was a cold determination that made him seem almost mechanical. The evidence he had gathered was no longer just proof of betrayal, it was fuel. He spent every evening reviewing the recordings again and again, memorizing details that had no purpose beyond feeding his rage. Every touch, every stolen glance, every moment of laughter between Julia and Eric became a wound he reopened willingly. It was no longer about heartbreak. It was about control. Julia carried on as if nothing was wrong. Her days were perfectly ordinary: gym in the morning, errands in the afternoon, phone glued to her hand in the evening. She had no idea that her husband had turned into someone she no longer knew, someone who studied her every movement like a scientist observing a dangerous experiment. The more she smiled, the more Mark's resentment grew. It wasn't just jealousy anymore. It was disgust. She had tainted everything: their home, their bed, their vows. He started changing without realizing it. His coworkers noticed first. Mark had always been quiet but dependable, the kind of man who finished what he started. Lately, though, he forgot assignments, snapped at people, and lost track of time. His hands trembled at odd moments and his eyes seemed distant. When asked if he was all right, he forced a smile and said he was just tired. No one pressed further. They couldn't have imagined what was truly brewing inside him. At home, Mark's silence grew heavier. Julia occasionally looked at him longer than usual, perhaps sensing a shift, but she never asked. Maybe she thought he was distracted by work. Maybe she didn't care? Either way, she didn't see the storm building behind his quiet stare. Mark began spending his evenings driving around the city, often ending up near Eric's neighborhood. He would park down the street from Eric's house, engine off, lights dimmed. He watched as Eric's wife and children played in the yard, unaware of the double life their husband and father was leading. Mark imagined telling her everything, imagined showing her the videos, but each time he stopped himself. Exposing Eric wasn't enough. What he wanted went beyond that. He wanted both of them, Julia and Eric, to feel the kind of agony that kept him awake every night. He followed Eric a few times after work. He learned his schedule, his habits, his routes. Eric liked to stop at the same gas station after leaving the gym. He bought the same coffee every morning from the small cafe near his office. He often stayed late at work on Thursdays. Mark's obsession grew with every detail he collected. He didn't even know what he was planning, only that the more he learned, the more he felt in control. The truth had once made him powerless. Now he was the one holding it tightly, deciding what to do with it. One Thursday evening, Julia mentioned she'd be training a special client at his private residence. Her tone was rehearsed, too casual. Mark simply nodded, pretending to scroll through his phone. He waited until she left, then followed at a distance, his headlights low. He already knew where she was going: Eric's rental house on the outskirts of town. The drive felt longer than usual. The roads were empty, and the sound of the tires on the asphalt filled the silence. Mark's thoughts were steady now, disturbingly focused. There was no shaking in his hands, no rush of panic. He parked 2 houses away, just like before, and waited. Through the drawn curtains, faint light flickered inside. His phone vibrated softly in his pocket, and he pulled it out to check the live feed from one of the cameras at home. Julia had left her laptop open again, still connected to the system. The irony made him smirk bitterly. Even when she tried to hide, she had left a door open for him to see everything. An hour passed, then two. Mark didn't move. He watched, eyes fixed on the window, breathing slow and shallow. He could almost picture what was happening inside. The betrayal didn't shock him anymore, it only deepened the numbness. When Julia finally left, she looked peaceful. She adjusted her hair in the car mirror, smiling faintly before driving away. Mark followed from a distance, the road stretching out endlessly ahead of him. The sight of her taillights made his chest ache, but not from sadness. It was something colder, sharper. He didn't recognize himself anymore, and that frightened him, yet part of him didn't care. The part of him that used to love, trust, and forgive was long gone. At home, Julia acted as though nothing had happened. She kissed him on the cheek, told him about her client's progress, and went upstairs to shower. Mark watched her from across the room. Everything about her looked the same voice, but to him, she was a stranger. He couldn't stop imagining her with that man, touching, laughing, whispering. The image burned in his mind until it became unbearable. That night, Mark sat in the dark living room, watching the glow of the television without seeing it. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge. He began thinking about how easily people could hide things, how a smile, a word, a gesture could conceal entire lives of deceit. Julia had done it effortlessly. She had smiled while lying to his face, and he had believed her. The realization disgusted him. His eyes drifted to the small camera on the bookshelf. That little device had shown him everything, stripped away every illusion he had left. He hated it, yet he couldn't bring himself to remove it. It was the only thing keeping him sane. The proof that his pain wasn't imagined. Mark began having trouble sleeping again. When he did, he dreamt of Julia's betrayal, only it always ended differently. In his dreams, he confronted them. Sometimes he shouted, sometimes he acted, and sometimes he just watched as they turned to see him standing there, silent and unblinking. He would wake drenched in sweat, his pulse racing, unsure where the dream ended and reality began. The next week, his obsession deepened. He started recording audio in addition to video, capturing every whisper, every sound. He downloaded copies of the recordings to his phone, listening to them late at night when Julia was asleep. It was self-inflicted torture, but he couldn't stop. He needed to feel the pain because it reminded him that what was happening was real. One night, as he reviewed the latest footage, a new idea took hold in his mind. He began to imagine what would happen if he stopped watching from afar. What if he stood there, not hidden behind screens or cameras, but right there where she could see him? The thought filled him with a strange sense of calm. He wasn't sure if it was justice or something darker, but he liked how it felt. The following days passed in a blur. Mark barely spoke. Julia seemed oblivious, her world spinning as if nothing had changed. But inside, Mark was preparing. He had rehearsed it all in his mind, where he would stand, what he would bring, how he would wait. He didn't need to say a word. He wanted her to see what she had done through his silence alone. By the time the next Friday came, his decision was made. Julia told him she had another late client, and he simply smiled. The moment she left, he waited 10 minutes, then followed quietly. He knew exactly where she was going, exactly what he would find. But this time, he wouldn't stay in the car. The calm that filled him wasn't human anymore. It was something darker, colder, deliberate. He didn't care what happened after that night. All he cared about was that when Julia turned around, she would finally see the face of the man she had destroyed and understand what she had awakened. Late that night, Eric sat in his car outside the motel, the one tucked behind a row of tall pine trees just off the highway. The rain was heavy again, blurring the windshield and muting every sound except the slow thump of his heartbeat. He had been sitting there for almost an hour, watching the lights in room 12 flicker on and off. He knew Lisa was inside. He had followed her from their house earlier that evening when she said she was going to the grocery store. She had taken the same road twice before, and both times Eric had chosen not to follow. Tonight, something in him broke. He had to see it for himself. He stepped out of the car and stood in the cold rain, staring at the faint shadow moving inside the lit window. His stomach twisted as he tried to make sense of the shapes. There were two figures. One of them was Lisa, unmistakably. The other was Ryan. Eric could barely breathe. His suspicion was now undeniable, captured in the simplest, most brutal truth. They were together, his wife and his friend. He didn't rush in or make a scene. Instead, he watched. Every minute felt like an hour. The betrayal unfolded in front of him, real and silent. There was no shouting, no confrontation, just the sound of rain and the growing weight of heartbreak. When the lights went out, Eric stayed there for a long time, soaked to the bone, watching the dark window as if waiting for something else to happen. He finally drove home, but he wasn't the same man who had left hours earlier. His mind replayed every memory with Lisa, every time Ryan had smiled in his presence. It all seemed poisoned now. The betrayal had changed everything. He didn't sleep that night. He just sat in the dark living room, staring at nothing, waiting for the sun to rise. The next day he acted normal. He greeted Lisa as she returned home, pretending not to notice how calm she seemed. She smiled as if nothing had happened. But Eric's silence grew heavier. He began to withdraw from everyone. He started checking her phone when she was in the shower. He read messages she thought were deleted. He followed her quietly on the days she claimed to visit her sister. Each time, the truth repeated itself. Lisa was meeting Ryan. Days turned into weeks, and Eric's obsession deepened. He didn't confront her because he wanted proof that could not be denied. He bought a small camera and placed it in her car, another in the living room. He tracked every move she made, every lie she told. What he discovered made his stomach turn. They weren't just meeting for brief moments. They were planning something. One night, Eric listened to a recorded conversation between them. They spoke about him, how distant he had become, how easy it would be to move on once he was out of the picture. The words hit like ice in his chest. It wasn't just an affair anymore. It was something darker. The tone in their voices suggested a plan, something that made Eric's hands tremble. He began to sense danger around him. Small things started happening. The brakes on his car squealed after being fined for years. His morning coffee tasted strange once or twice, and one night he woke up coughing, smelling gas in the air. Lisa dismissed it as a leak in the heater, but Eric wasn't sure. He didn't know if paranoia had taken hold or if she truly wanted him gone. To protect himself, Eric installed cameras throughout the house, hidden in picture frames, air vents, and light fixtures. He recorded everything. He didn't sleep much anymore, surviving on caffeine and suspicion. What he saw over the next few days confirmed his worst fears. Lisa wasn't just cheating. She was preparing for something permanent. She had begun moving money from their joint account. She made phone calls in whispers. She erased messages immediately after sending them. Eric collected everything, the footage, the bank statements, the receipts. He wanted to go to the police, but he needed undeniable evidence. He wanted to catch them in the act. He planned to record it himself, so there would be no doubt. He bought a new hidden camera and placed it in the bedroom, disguised as a smoke detector. Then he waited. A few nights later, Lisa told him she was meeting her sister again. Eric pretended to believe her. As soon as she left, he checked the live feed from the camera. The house was quiet. Hours passed. Then, close to midnight, the front door opened. Lisa walked in, but she wasn't alone. Ryan followed her, carrying a bottle of wine. They laughed softly, unaware that every movement was being captured on video. Eric watched from his car parked a few blocks away. His hands shook as he saw them walk upstairs together. His heart raced, but he forced himself to stay still. He couldn't burst in. He needed to see how far they would go. The image on his phone screen was grainy, but clear enough to show everything. He sat there, motionless, watching as his worst nightmare became reality in his own home. For almost an hour, Eric didn't move. When Ryan finally left, Lisa turned off the lights and went to bed as if nothing had happened. Eric's breathing was shallow, his mind blank. The video kept playing in a loop before him. The proof, the betrayal, the final confirmation that everything was over. But beneath the pain, something else began to stir. A cold calmness, something darker than sadness. He saved the footage, backed it up twice, and began planning what to do next. He couldn't live like this anymore, but he wasn't sure what next even meant. The betrayal had twisted his thoughts beyond reason. He felt invisible now, like a ghost in his own life, watching everyone lie while pretending everything was fine. The next morning, Lisa acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled, poured him coffee, and chatted about groceries. Eric sat across from her, expressionless, watching her every move, every blink, every fake gesture. She had no idea that he knew everything, or that he was watching her even now. He realized then that it wasn't just about catching them anymore. It was about making sure they couldn't hurt him again. Whatever they had planned, he would end it before they could. Something inside him had shifted permanently. The man who once loved Lisa was gone. What remained was someone colder, quieter, and far more dangerous. Eric spent the following days in silence, his mind locked in a storm that no one could see. On the surface, he appeared calm going to work, answering texts, and pretending life was normal, but every second was filled with planning. The footage of Lisa and Ryan never left his mind. It played over and over, every frame burning deeper into his thoughts. He had all the proof he needed, yet instead of feeling relief, he felt trapped in a spiral that had no end. The betrayal was total. His marriage, his friendship, his home, all of it had become a stage for deception. Lisa continued her routine without suspicion. She still smiled when she left in the evenings, still made calls in the next room, still lied effortlessly. Eric knew her schedule now down to the minute. He knew when Ryan came to the house and when he left. Every secret meeting was recorded, every careless whisper stored. But there was something else that Eric noticed in the recordings, something that unsettled him more than their betrayal. He began to see them searching. They checked drawers, lifted picture frames, opened closets. It wasn't random. They were looking for something. It took Eric a few days to understand. They suspected he knew. Maybe Lisa had noticed one of the hidden cameras, or perhaps Ryan had sensed the change in Eric's behavior. Either way, their faces had lost the careless ease they once had. Now they seemed cautious, waiting for the right moment to act. The tension in the house became unbearable. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a warning. Every night felt longer than the one before. Eric decided to act before they did. He transferred all his digital recordings to an encrypted drive and stored it at a locker he rented under another name. He deleted traces from his devices and made sure nothing in the house pointed back to him. Then he began to test them to see how far they would go. He left small clues, a misplaced object, a half-written note on the kitchen counter, a login attempt on Lisa's phone. The effect was immediate. Lisa grew restless. She started asking vague questions, trying to gauge how much Eric knew. Ryan became distant, texting her less often, visiting less frequently. Fear had replaced their confidence, and Eric could feel it. But their fear didn't stop them. One night, while Eric pretended to sleep, he heard the faint sound of footsteps outside the bedroom door. Then a soft click from the kitchen. Someone was moving through the house in the dark. He stayed perfectly still, his breathing slow, his heart racing. Through the shadow under the door, he saw a brief flash of light like a phone screen turning on. Minutes passed before the sound faded again. When morning came, nothing was missing, but Eric noticed something small and unsettling. The memory card from one of his cameras was gone. They knew. The realization changed everything. Eric's fear hardened into determination. If they wanted to play a dangerous game, he would finish it. He bought a new set of cameras and placed them in the most unexpected places inside air vents, beneath the couch, and even behind the refrigerator. He captured every corner of the house, every room, every move. Then he waited. The next few days unfolded like a tense act in a play. Lisa tried harder to keep her composure, but her nerves betrayed her. She jumped at small noises, avoided his eyes, and started locking her phone whenever he entered the room. Ryan stopped coming to the house altogether, but Eric noticed Lisa leaving for longer drives, always at odd hours. Something was being planned, something final. Then, one evening, Eric found a bottle of wine open on the counter, one he hadn't touched. It was his favorite brand, a kind Lisa never bought on her own. The gesture was too careful, too sudden. His instincts screamed at him not to drink it. Instead, he quietly poured the wine into a clear glass and stored it in a container in the fridge. Later that night, while Lisa was asleep, he replaced the wine with a similar bottle. He wanted to see what would happen. The next day, Lisa seemed nervous again. She kept glancing toward the fridge, as if waiting for him to do something. When he didn't, her tension grew. Eric knew then that he had been right. The wine wasn't meant to comfort him. It was a trap. That night, when Lisa left the house again, Eric followed her, keeping a few cars behind. She drove to the edge of town, to the same motel as before. He watched her meet Ryan in the parking lot. They talked in hushed tones before getting into his truck. Eric followed them all the way to a wooded area off the main road. The headlights cut through the darkness for a moment before they disappeared. Eric parked nearby and walked silently through the trees until he could see them standing by the truck, their voices low and tense. He couldn't hear everything, but one word kept repeating, "Tonight." He saw Ryan hand Lisa a small package, then a brief hug before they parted ways. Lisa drove home alone. Eric waited in the shadows, realizing the weight of what he'd just seen. Whatever was in that package was meant for him. When he returned home, Lisa was already there, pretending to be asleep. Eric sat in the living room, staring at her from the hallway. He felt no anger now, no heartbreak, only clarity. The cameras, the lies, the sleepless nights all had led to this. He finally knew what she was capable of. At dawn, Eric left the house and went straight to the police. He handed over the hard drive, the photos, the recordings, and even the wine sample. The officers didn't believe him at first, but when they reviewed the footage, their skepticism vanished. Within hours, they had enough evidence to act. That evening, Lisa was taken into custody while Ryan was picked up from his workplace. The news spread quickly across the small town. Neighbors whispered, unable to comprehend the story, how a husband had uncovered not only infidelity, but a plan that could have ended his life. The footage became the center of the investigation. It showed the meetings, the hidden exchanges, and even Ryan's words about getting rid of the problem. Eric watched it all unfold from the corner of his now empty living room. The silence felt different now. The fear was gone, but so was everything else. The home he once loved was just a shell, filled with the faint hum of the cameras he'd once installed for protection. Weeks later, he moved out, leaving behind the memories that had destroyed him. Lisa and Ryan faced trial, their betrayal laid bare for everyone to see. But Eric didn't stay to watch the outcome. He disappeared quietly, driving away from the town that had become his prison. He never remarried, he never returned. The footage of that final night was never released to the public, but parts of the story spread through whispers, retold in documentaries and podcasts as one of the most chilling domestic betrayals ever recorded. A husband who watched the truth unfold through his own cameras and survived what was meant to end him.